On the beaches of Normandy, the tide of the Second World War changed as Allied troops carried out the largest amphibious assault in history. These soldiers relied on rugged timepieces that served as essential tools. In this video, we'll discuss the watches used by service members on D-Day and throughout World War II, including the iconic Dirty Dozen references. In war, time matters. Watches of Espionage is curated by a former CIA case officer with a passion for timepieces. On the WWII YouTube channel, we explore the intersection of watches and the military, intelligence, and national security. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to be informed when we release new videos. On Tuesday, 6 June 1944, nearly 160,000 Allied troops crossed the English Channel and stormed the beaches of northwestern France. Suffering incredible casualties, the brave men and women who participated in Operation Overlord, the code name for the invasion, changed the course of history, initiating a carefully coordinated plan that would liberate France and ultimately lead to Allied victory in Europe. Starting at 0630, Allied soldiers disembarked from their landing crafts and assaulted deeply entrenched German defensive positions on 5 beaches, codenamed Omaha, Utah, Gold, Sword, and Juno. The operation was supported by 11,000 aircraft and 7,000 watercraft. Shortly before the waterborne landings and under the cover of darkness, over 13,000 paratroopers, including commandos from the Office of Strategic Services, jumped further inland to weaken the German defensive network, providing a strategic advantage to the amphibious landings. For most, D-Day colloquially refers to the Normandy landings in 1944, but in a broader military context, D-Day indicates the day of a planned combat action, with H-hour designating the precise time of day of that action on D-Day. In the case of the invasion of Normandy, D-Day was originally set for 05 June, but General Eisenhower chose to delay the attack due to rough seas and inclement weather. In war, time matters. On D-Day, the highly coordinated effort between Allied nations meant every single soldier, ship, landing craft operator, and aircraft had to be on time and operating in unison. Long before the digital age, what tool helped orchestrate an invasion that shifted the outcome of the war? The humble wristwatch. For service members fighting in the Second World War, watches weren't the luxury items they are today. Soldiers wore robust watches that were issued to them as an integral part of the set of tools needed to do an important job. In the 1940s, the idea of wearing watches on the wrist as opposed to carrying them in your pocket was only a couple of decades old, having taken hold during the First World War when so-called trench watches were fashioned from pocket watches with soldered lug bars that allowed for the use of a strap. When World War II began, watchmakers stepped up to provide Allied forces with rugged watches designed for war. Here are some of the timepieces that, in a small but impactful way, helped to win the Second World War. Known to history buffs as the watch that won the war, the A11 was the most ubiquitous service watch during World War II, issued in huge numbers to troops from the United States, Britain, and Canada. A11 refers to a specification rather than the watches themselves, which meant that various watchmakers, including Bulova, Elgin, Waltham, and others, could produce watches conforming to the specification to sell to the government for issue to service members. A11 watches had to meet an exacting set of requirements, including having a black dial with white Arabic indices, a manual winding movement with center seconds and hacking functionality, and a minute track with 10-minute demarcations. Most A11s were housed within 30 to 32 millimeter cases that could be either brass or steel. Beyond those core specs, there was some variation among issued A11 watches, including the level of water resistance, the presence or absence of luminescent material, and other non-critical elements, including the shape of the bezel. The A11 became the watch of the Allied forces during World War II and was issued in massive numbers across nations, services, and occupational specialties. Beyond telling the time and surviving the rigors of war, the A11's biggest benefit was its hacking caliber, allowing large groups of warfighters to precisely synchronize their watches before a planned combat action where coordination was key. Despite being used more broadly, the A-11 was theoretically intended for aviation and specific maritime operations. In contrast, Ordnance Department, or ORD watches, were general-purpose timepieces intended for and issued primarily to U.S. Army soldiers on the ground. A specification outlined in the TM 9-1575 War Department Technical Manual allows for some variation in design, meaning ORD watches produced by Waltham, Hamilton, Bulova, and Elgin, all of the biggest U.S. watchmaking names at the time, have their own twists. Distinguished by their white dials, ORD watches have a sub-seconds register at 6 o'clock and abbreviated Ordnance Department engravings on the caseback. Made from nickel-plated brass, the ORD watches did not offer hacking functionality. Where the United States had a booming watch industry of its own leading up to the Second World War, Britain had to rely on neutral Switzerland to produce another legendary collection of watches from this time frame. Among the most well-known watches from the Second World War are the legendary Dirty Dozen. The watches were a Swiss answer to a British call to action for a war watch with a black dial with Arabic numerals, a sub-seconds register, luminous hands and indices, and a precise, preferably chronometer-grade movement, all housed within a shock and water-resistant case with a large, easy-to-grip crown. Britain was home to some watchmaking in the 1940s, but given wartime shortages, orders were placed with 12 Swiss watchmakers, with the watches later earning the Dirty Dozen nickname from collectors, a nod to the 1967 World War II film of the same name. Particularly appealing to the military watch community, some of watchmaking's greatest names were represented among the dozen, including Omega, JLC, IWC, and Longines. Despite some variation among the brands, each watch was engraved with WWW for Watch, Wrist, Waterproof on the caseback, along with the broad arrow insignia denoting the watches as British government property. In contrast to the A-11 and ORD watches from the States, many Dirty Dozen watches were larger, up to 38 millimeters for the Longines, and some were also housed in stainless steel cases that have withstood the test of time better than many watches from the era. The Dirty Dozen watches were not in circulation for D-Day, but likely did see action during the tail end of the Second World War, while influencing the future of military and field watches for decades to come. As the need for hydrographic reconnaissance and maritime special operations became apparent during the war, the U.S. Navy issued its FSX 797 specification, the U.S. government's first for a submersible wristwatch. Intended for the naval combat demolition units who cleared the beaches of obstacles before D-Day, as well as the pioneering underwater demolition teams and the OSS Maritime Unit, the resulting watch was known as the Canteen for its screw-down crown cover, which was connected to the central case with a small chain. Manufactured primarily by Elgin, with other examples known from Hamilton and Bulova, the total production figures of the Bureau of Ships, or BUSHIPS Canteen, are unknown, but the watch proved effective in underwater scenarios, ultimately seeing service until the 1950s and beyond before being overtaken by commercially available dive watches from brands like Rolex, Tudor, and Blancpain. Despite that incredible history, vintage examples of Canteen watches are still surprisingly affordable. Timekeeping during Operation Overlord and countless other missions in the Second World War was often the difference between success and failure. Many of the watches used by soldiers of the era could have been considered sparse, simple, or even cheap, but a watch is never just a watch. Looking beyond their utilitarian value as tools of armed conflict, the watches of World War II represent more, serving as enduring reminders of those who fought and died to change the course of world history. What's your favorite watch from the Second World War? Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, drop a comment, and hit the bell icon to be informed when we release new videos. For even more, check out our website, watchesofespionage.com, for more content, as well as our collection of watch straps and other purpose-built tools designed for our community. Until next time, happy hunting.